Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, you lovely folks joining me here nice and early at Marvel Snap Zone. Welcome back for another installment of our weekly tier list segment where I break down for you the best decks in Marvel Snap right now, look at how they are constantly evolving to an established metagame, and upcoming challengers who might be looking to take the throne. A little less than a week after a surprise balance patch caught us all off guard, I wish I could tell you that everything has changed and the Marvel Snap metagame is unsolved and fresh. Unfortunately, Lockjaw Thanos and Shuri Zero remain the solid anchors at the top of the metagame, and they don't seem to be willing to let any other deck join them. We're at a point where most decks are running both Shang-Chi and Arrow, and it still doesn't feel like enough to topple these two juggernauts. As always, if you want more information or more Marvel Snap content, make sure you subscribe to the channel for me down below. Leave a comment about how you feel about the metagame, and make sure you like the video for me as well to keep the YouTube algorithm happy. With all that said, let's take a look at the tier list in full and start breaking down everything we see this week. As always, we've got some budget options for you. These have remained mostly the same as the metagame hasn't changed enough to influence what's available to players with a lower card pool. But if you want some more information and some deck lists about those, feel free to go and click the article in the description box down below. Tier 4 this week actually has some pretty relevant changes all around. Patriot making enough of a resurgence off the back of Debris, a card that is surprisingly good against Thanos Lockjaw and causes a decent amount of lane disruption all around. Negative Zabu unfortunately continues its tumble down, not really handling the metagame as well as it would like to, not really able to put up enough of a points total to compete with the big dogs right now. Kazoo Zerocular also finds itself in Tier 4 this week, another new addition people are experimenting with as a way to combat this existing metagame. Tier 3 this week is mostly a downward trend. Discard Dracula remains where it is, another deck that is exceptionally popular for a lot of players but not really offering the flexibility required to aggressively win 4 to 8 cube games. With Deathwave and Zabu Devil Darkhawk on the way down, two decks really struggling in the current environment. Tier 2 this week is a little bit larger. Galactus remains a linchpin of this tier, once again finding itself able to steal cubes when it matters and just change fundamentally what the game is all about. Lockjaw Thor remains one of the best options for players who are Series 3 complete without Series 4 and 5 cards, offering you a very similar play experience as Thanos Lockjaw if you are missing the Mad Titan himself. Electro Sandman ramp is the only new inclusion in this tier, thanks to the buff to Sandman in the most recent patch. This deck is still being refined and experimented with by a lot of players, so maybe it has what it takes to take the crown in the near future. Thanos Ongoing Zoo is the least popular variation of Thanos right now, but it's combining synergies of previous lists to kind of surprise opponents and steal cubes where it matters, and definitely one that's worth paying attention to. Last but not least, Sera Control makes a return to the list with a little bit of a twist this time around, finding itself to be the new home for Darkhawk. We'll elaborate more on that in just a moment. As mentioned before, the top tier of the game remains completely locked solid. These two decks are just far and away above everything else you can be doing in the game right now. Lockjaw Thanos and Shuri Zero don't seem to be going anywhere. If you're looking for creativity and individuality, Silent Performance of the Week might be able to help you out this week. As always, decks that appear here are ones with a positive cube rate according to the tracker data, but not being played enough to be able to make it onto the tier list, having less than a 1% metagame share. To this week, we've got the Magic Combo deck with a little tint of disruption, Toxic Sera Control, which we featured on the channel a few days ago, and the Lockjaw Thanos Ongoing variation of the deck, which you can find a deck list for in the article down below. All three of these decks would be ranked close to at the top of Tier 2 at the very least. The important question should be whether they can overtake the current dominant decks in the future should players choose to pick them up. So let's start breaking down these monstrous decks and showing you what they look like and how you should go about playing them. Lockjaw Thanos will start things off for us this week. It has retained the top spot once again, even if Shuri Zero is much closer by the numbers this time around. I would attribute this to Aero and Shang-Chi being absolutely everywhere, and that duo being much more annoying for Shuri Zero than they are for Lockjaw. Also, this deck technically saw a Thanos buff during the week, which incentivized more players to go after the Mad Titan and begin playing this archetype. Lastly, a new variation to this build has emerged with its ongoing synergies at the core. That's a more synergistic deck, which you can find a list for in the article if you prefer, with more synergies than overall strong cards featured in the popular build you see on screen now. That variation makes much better use of the stones because of Khazar, Ant-Man and others featured in that list. In my opinion, it makes the deck stronger in the games where you don't draw Lockjaw because you still have a solid core to abuse, but it significantly dampens the impact of your high roll potential when you do draw Lockjaw instead. You can find that ongoing build available in the Silent Performers of the Week section. Shuri Zero remains around for another week. It's just the deck to beat on the ladder in the eyes of many, but Shang-Chi being included in every single deck prevents the deck from simply beating everyone down in its path. The only downside is that it's become quite predictable, which leads to opponents knowing when to snap and when to retreat, significantly slowing your climbing speed. Even then, Cosmo and Armor can sometimes be delayed to snipe the Shang-Chi or draw an unadvised snap from your opponent. These two are slowly taking over from Sauron in the popularity poll. They are also listed and mixing Cosmo and Sauron together, where you would just play the one that you drew on turn 3, and the rest of the match often being your go-to Shuri into Red Skull into Taskmaster play pattern. Moving down into tier number 2, Sera Control, getting a couple of fresh takes this week between Silent Performers and the Darkhawk list you see on screen right now. It's a deck that seems to be having very different results from one week to the next. It seems to have a good build this time around for several reasons. The deck picked up in popularity after the Darkhawk nerf, which saw the more proactive build centered around the card suffer overall. The metagame is now concentrated around 2 decks in particular, making it much easier to build a reactive archetype, and Sandman wasn't as popular as one might expect after its recent change, so it didn't feel like Sera was hard countered too much. Overall, it seems like the surprise factor of Sera was on its side this week, which led to this deck performing very well. Let's see what happens next week now the deck has gained enough attention and might not be able to surprise its opponents quite as easily. Thanos Ongoing Zoo is largely in the shadow of the Lockjaw deck, but this Thanos only build is slowly gaining popularity week after posting some solid results across the board. This time it seems like Valkyrie has finally become a staple in the deck. The card represents one of, if not the best, Shuri Zero counter in Marvel Snap, since it gets around armor. Outside of that specific trait, the ongoing synergy just seems to be a solid deck with a simple concept to grasp. It feels clear now that this is the best way to build the ongoing theme, as the Destroyer-based deck, although still popular among many Series 3 players, simply hasn't posted significant results in quite a while. Considering how difficult it is to challenge a tier 1 spot in the current metagame, sitting near the top of tier 2 is already the sign of a very, very good deck. If the archetype didn't require Thanos and probably Valkyrie for the Shuri Zero matchup, I imagine we'd be seeing significantly more of this one on the ladder. Electro Sandman ramp finds itself in tier 2 this week. I'm not actually sure if the Sandman buff made this deck much stronger, but it definitely brought the spotlight back to Electro this week. The deck easily took the title of biggest rise in popularity, but in the most competitive ranks, it feels like Electro Sandman isn't that different from most of the other tier 2 decks. It's just a good deck with nice synergies, but it's not on the same level as Shuri Zero or Lockjaw Thanos. As a result, the deck should be great for players who are still collecting Series 3, provided they have Black Panther in their collection. It's a fairly easy deck to play and seems to do just good against other decks all round, not dominating Marvel Snap this season. If we had to talk about Sandman specifically, the card did get much better with the buff, as it was enough to make it appear in a popular deck, yet the fact that Shuri Zero is mostly completely unfazed by this card is a big blow to Sandman's homecoming party. Lock-Thor finds itself in tier 2 once again this week. Time has passed and we are now pretty sure that the Thanos build is the superior way to play with Lockjaw in the current metagame. Arguably, Lockjaw Thor is still among the strongest decks if we're looking to play something that is Series 3 only, but it seems like Thanos provides a lot of flexibility and explosive power thanks to the Infinity Stones. Another week where Galactus has been a difficult archetype to read. There doesn't seem to be a go-to list on this deck anymore, and everyone is trying to build the deck to fit their idea of how to get the safest Galactus possible. With Aero being everywhere and Cosmo becoming a staple in Shuri Zero, Galactus doesn't seem to have adapted to the current metagame, but remains a solid deck nonetheless. Moving down to Tier 3, we see the fall of Zabu Darkhawk. The big dive of the week goes to the proactive version of this deck, which seems to have suffered a ton from the recent changes. For what it's worth, I think the deck's main problem is the fact that it's mostly a proactive build, and there are better options for being proactive in the form of Thanos Lockjaw and Shuri Zero. In those two decks, the first one has Leech, which simply completely dismantles this deck, as all your key cards are now worthless. And the second should beat you on points if its draws are of similar quality. As long as these two decks are the kings of the current metagame, it seems difficult to justify running a deck like this one. Deathwave also on a massive decline this week. It kind of hurts from Sandman making a bit of a return, and Leech gaining popularity in all of the Lockjaw decks, making Deathwave a poor choice for this week, a deck that was already struggling with the increase in armor and Cosmo. The deck feels great among Series 3 decks and should probably be able to challenge Lockjaw Thor for the title of Best Series 3 deck. However, if we look at the bigger picture, it just seems that there are too many things going against Deathwave for it to feel like a reasonable pick right now. Discard Dracula remains unmoving over the course of the season. The big popularity spike Discard had from getting a dedicated card in the Battle Pass seems to have trended downwards slightly towards the end of the season. Overall, Modok is a fantastic addition to this deck, but the flexibility problem just seems like it's too big to overcome. If the deck had a way to move its cards around, it could easily rise to Tier 2 in no time. Also, Sandman, Leech and Cosmo are not helping at all with this deck, as it makes it even harder for the archetype to reach its full potential, something it really needs to compete in the current environment. The balance patch was a super exciting, surprising announcement that unfortunately has fallen a bit flat in the end, as Shuri Zero and Lockjaw Thanos just do not feel impacted at all. On the contrary, Shuri Zero has no problem with Sandman, and Thanos got a 3 power increase in that patch. As a result, it feels like it will be up to the community to find a solution to fight these decks and shake their hold on the metagame if it's possible. The evolutions around the ongoing archetype are very interesting in my opinion. Whether they include Lockjaw or not, it plays around Cosmo better while not losing any potential in the synergy department. These new lists, they're showing how good Thanos can be, with or without Lockjaw, and maybe its buff wasn't so warranted after all. Thanos being so strong has developed the creativity of certain players, which has led to the Toxic Sera build as a way to try and counter the board being so full. The balance patch just wasn't enough to make Marvel Snap feel fresh, so we probably have to wait for the start of next season or an even bigger balance patch for that to happen. It's still a step in the right direction at the very least, and it does show there are avenues to feeling like the only way to gain cubes is through Lockjaw or Shuri right now. As normal, if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us in the community Discord server down below in the description box. Give it a click and come and talk Marvel Snap with thousands of other players 24 hours a day. Alternatively, if you want to find the team over on Twitter, you can do that too. Come and find us at Marvel Snap Zone, then TCG, or at HowlingMines. But with all that said and done, thank you for watching. I've been HowlingMines, you've been amazing, and this has been Marvel Snap Zone. Take care of yourself. Have a good one.